What's up guys, Alexander here with Date Psychology. Today I want to go over the mate switching hypothesis with you. And this is going to be a walkthrough of the paper by the same name, which basically lays out and explores this hypothesis. Name of the paper, as I said, same name, the mate switching hypothesis. You can see it here on the screen if you want to get it and follow through. The author of this paper is David Buss, basically the founder of evolutionary psychology. You may have heard of his name before, you may not have, but if you continue to follow this channel, if you continue to do research into evolutionary psychology, no doubt you will, because he's the guy, right? He's considered the guy, the evolutionary psychology guy. So let's look at some background information here, going into the paper, all right? Something he points out at the beginning is that humans aren't lifelong pair bonders, right? Humans don't practice lifelong monogamy in most cases. Okay, people perform serial monogamy. They get into a relationship, they break up, they get into another relationship. And that is typically the pattern, as opposed to something like a prairie vole, right? Which mates for life, doesn't live very long, but it mates for its whole life, stays with the same partner, and it dies. Humans can form long-term pair bonds, right? Humans are pair bonders, but more like birds that pair bond seasonally, human beings form pair bonds for short periods of time. And so what does that mean, of course? It means that breaking up, right? Moving on to a new partner, cheating as well, these are all big features of human mating patterns. So a few things that he points out at the beginning. Human divorce rates, you guys probably already know this, about 50%. This varies on culture, it varies over the time period, but right now in the West, divorce rates pretty consistent at about 50%. If you look at cheating, if you look at infidelity, this is something that also shows up pretty consistently. About half of men report some kind of infidelity, about a quarter of women do, and this can go up or down depending on the research. So if you want to dispute that, you might want to look into different papers that give different numbers. But to get a general idea, men typically cheat a little bit more than women do. We see that most Americans eventually break up, right? Most Americans have gone through a breakup at some point, about 85% of Americans. So breaking up for anyone who dates is kind of a normal event. It's something that you're going to experience eventually. If you haven't experienced it already, if you have, you're probably going to experience it again. And well, it is what it is, guys. So the question derived from all of this is basically, why do people break up? How do they break up? What leads up to a breakup? What kind of cheating or mate switching happens? And what explains that? And to provide a further basis of what explains that, Buss describes 6 evolutionary adaptations in human mating patterns specifically related to breakups that help people leave a relationship, or that help people evaluate a relationship, decide to move on to another partner, or to leave an existing partner. And the first of these is a cost-benefit analysis, right? They monitor the current relationship for costs and benefits. Is this beneficial to me? Is it costly to me? And we'll get into that. We'll get into all of this as we go through, but just some general concepts to go over first. People evaluate new mates, and they even do this when they're still mated, right? So mating isn't random. We don't just get into a relationship and then never think about it again. We don't evaluate someone as a mate and then choose them and then forget about it. We evaluate who is going to be a high value mate, who is going to be a low value mate, and we continue to do that in a dynamic way going on through the relationship. People have developed strategies as well to circumvent partners' mate guarding tactics. And what does that mean? Well, for example, in the case of infidelity, people develop tactics to sneak around, right? To have a partner on the side. They develop tactics to break up from a relationship without incurring costs of that relationship. If someone says, I want to break up, and the other person says no, they find a way to negotiate that so that they can eventually break up, and so on. So that's what it is. Ways that we have developed to essentially circumvent these mate guarding tactics of our partners, men and women. Okay, number 4, self-explanatory. Engage in infidelity, right? People cheat. How much they cheat by gender, all of that is certainly up for debate and dispute, but it's a fact of human mating, human relationships, that people do cheat. And I'm not saying you should cheat. I'm not giving you license to cheat by saying, oh, it's natural to cheat, therefore you should cheat, and when you do, it's an excuse. No, because you don't have to do it. And as you can see, you know, if it's, let's say it's 50% men and 50% women, even though the past statistics said 50 and 25 that I just quoted, you know, half of you won't. So it's not like it's an inevitable thing. So just to clarify that, I'm not saying humans cheat, therefore you should cheat, or therefore it's natural to cheat and it gives you a license. No, this is descriptive. It's not prescriptive, guys. People learn to deploy exit strategies, right? And that means they learn how to do breakups with incurring minimum costs, because the costs of breakups can be very high. And that's something that we'll look at into more, and we'll go into a little bit here as well. And the final one, people switch to a new partner when that cost-benefit analysis is convenient for them, when it provides a reward or a dividend for them. What does that mean? When people decide to leave a partner and when people decide to enter a new relationship is when it benefits them in some way. A little bit more background here. What we have is called the walk-away adaptation, right? And this basically is an adaptation that describes how people break up, how human beings leave their partners. And the simplest way is that they create physical distance, right? They physically remove themselves. They leave. They leave the house, they break up, and they no longer speak to that person. You can see this in primates as well. When a relationship doesn't work out and they don't want to be together anymore, they just create distance between themselves, right? And the mate switching hypothesis kind of falls into this. You could say it's a form of this walk-away adaptation, because it explains how people walk away, how they walk away with incurring minimum costs, why they do it, and so on. Let's go over briefly men and women. So the mate switching hypothesis, this applies to men and women. Not on every single point, but on most of them. In this paper, we're going to focus mostly on female mate switching adaptations and behaviors. Why? Well, because that's what Buss focused on in this paper, but also because some of these things do uniquely apply to women in ways that they don't to men. And the reason for that is because men benefit more from infidelity, right? In an ancestral environment, in a prehistorical environment, male infidelity meant that one man could go out and impregnate many, many women. Little risk to himself. If he impregnates a woman and never sees her again, right, he doesn't incur any costs, basically. A woman, on the other hand, incurs many, many, many costs. And this is at the root of sex differences between male and female sexual strategies, right? It's why men are more promiscuous, why men cheat more on average, why there's a libido gap, why men have higher libidos on average. A lot of these things can come down to being explained by the costs incurred by pregnancy in women. So these costs are key, and infidelity in women is thus a risky strategy, because if a woman cheats, right, she could lose her current partner. And having a current partner is a very important part of the child-rearing strategy that human beings evolve together, which basically, you see a very long gestation in humans, for example. 9 months to bear a child. The child has a very extended juvenile period. If there's two parents that can raise this child, it's more likely to survive. And not even speaking of modern outcomes where a household with two parents is so much more advantageous for a child. Speaking in ancestral terms, a woman alone with a child would be at risk of being killed, would be at risk of having her child killed. Perhaps she cannot provide resources and care for that child at the same time. So the man can go out and hunt, he can go out and forage, he can collect resources while she cares for the child. And not only in dyads of interpersonal relationships, but this also probably explains a lot of why human beings evolved to be so incredibly communal and so incredibly social. This is related to the good genes hypothesis, and I've made videos about this. I have an article about this as well. Going over this briefly, the alternative would be that women cheat to secure good genes. Most of the research that we have, recent research, hasn't been able to replicate findings that would support this hypothesis. And so what David Buss did was he came up with an alternative hypothesis that basically addresses the failings of the good genes hypothesis. It explains a lot of female behavior in mate selection, in infidelity, in affairs, in switching partners that the good gene hypothesis could not actually account for. And so that's what we're going to be looking at here, the mate switching hypothesis, basically as an alternative to the good genes hypothesis. Getting into it now, a fundamental question, right? Why do women cheat? Why do women switch mates more accurately? These are adaptive problems. The reasons for this would be rooted in adaptation to the environment. They would be reasons that, from an evolutionary perspective, right, because it's evolutionary psychology, would have been adaptive for that woman or helped her in some way. One reason might be that her current mate, the man, loses value. Let's say he is injured. Let's say he becomes infertile. He can't produce more children. He's injured, so he can't collect resources, right? Worst case scenario, he dies or he's about to die. She has to take care of him now because he's sick. Perhaps even He becomes violent with her. He imposes costs on her. He hurts her. He hurts the children, for example. These are things that would be counter-adaptive. They would be harmful to the woman long term, and thus leaving that relationship, distancing herself from that man, would be advantageous, would be an adaptive behavior. So we see, on the one hand, the man's behavior goes down, the man's value goes down. On the flip side, what if the woman's value increased? An increase in the value of an individual woman can also explain mate switching. It could also be a reason why a woman would want to leave and pick a higher value mate. So why would a woman's value go up? Well, perhaps she has an increase in status within the group, so she has more access to higher value men. Perhaps she has an increase in physical condition. For example, she loses weight. That's kind of a modern example, perhaps. Maybe she has new skills that benefit the relationship more that she didn't previously have. Maybe she loses a child, right? She's no longer a mother. The child has died or the child has grown up. And so now she isn't as burdensome of a mate. Because if you're a man, especially in an ancestral environment, and you pick a mate that has a child, you now have to support that mate and that child. Your resources go to raising your mate, taking care of your mate and the child. And that's going to be resources that you would have to divide amongst yourself, amongst a additional child if you produce a child with that woman, and so on. So when a woman is childless, because she has lost a child, this can signify a increase in value, and it would be an initial increase in value as well if the woman doesn't have a child to begin with. And the final one would be the addition of new mating alternatives. Okay, so what was very common in ancestral environments was small groups of humans would come across other small groups of humans and they would mix. They would change members, maybe they would refashion the structure of their group, break up and go off. Maybe they would combine into one larger group. And what would happen here is you would have an influx of new mates, more desirable mates, maybe if you're lucky, and more partners to select from in that case. Suddenly, you're in a tribe, there's not very many women, you come across another tribe, there's a lot of women. Oh, okay, so now you have more options. Or you come across a tribe and there's a surplus of men and you're a woman, and you think, oh, these men are a lot better in this other tribe and they don't have mates. And that's the second part to this. If a high value mate loses their current mate, right? So a high value man, he's very desirable, he's the best hunter, he's the strongest and most attractive guy. He is also a good partner, he makes babies and supports them. His partner dies. Now he's single. Okay, so a high value mate has just opened up in the tribe. Perhaps she leaves her low value mate and goes to this higher value man. So that's it, guys. There's these three main reasons why, where I could say we would consider them inputs in a way, where a woman would switch to a higher value mate, right? The current mate declines in value, her value increases, and suddenly new higher value men are available. And so on the one side, we talk about these things that incentivize switching. But there's also things that disincentivize or disincentivize switching as well, right? Costs. So what kind of things would make switching a mate costly? A lot, because it is very costly, especially in an ancestral environment. If you are a woman, to lose basically your provider and your protector. Costs matter. And even in the modern environment, costs matter. Is it really worth it? If you're switching your mate from your current mate is an 8, so he's already 2 standard deviations above the mean. You know, there's maybe 2% of people like him in the whole pool, and you're going to switch from him to an 8.5. Is that really worth it? Maybe not. But if your mate is a 4 and you have a 7, maybe that's more worth it. So considering the costs and if it is worth it is key. You have that cost, risk, benefit analysis going on here. Reputation is important. Reputation would be a big factor that limits mate switching, and we see this all the way up to the modern era, right? Reputation, for example, virginity is typically a higher sign of quality. In many, many societies, women who are divorced are considered lower value. Women who have had many past partners or who have been promiscuous are considered lower value. Those are reputational factors. If a woman is seen as unfaithful to her partner, that's a reputational factor that may make her an undesirable mate, right? Because If you are a man, do you want to select a woman who is known to cheat a lot? Are you going to be sure that the baby is yours? And even if you don't care about babies, are you going to be sure that the relationship is good? You know, even today, in a modern environment that has nothing to do with procreation, or I should say that has little directly on the outside to do with procreation, these are still things that determine a woman's value reputationally. Loss of family, loss of friends, and loss of the step family support would be big, big limitations, especially in an ancestral kind of tribal environment. If part of your family and part of your social support structure is the family of your husband or your partner, and you break up with him, you may lose all of that. And we see this in modern environments as well, where people depend much on the families of their spouses. They break up and they do much, much more poorly. It's actually very common following a divorce for women to enter states of poverty. They do very poorly following divorces in most cases. It's also common to see now, and would have been the case in the past, that people lose friends that are also part of their support network, right? Friends that are friends with a couple will side with one or the other. And who they side with is going to depend on a lot of things, but that is one of the costs or the risks. Another cost would be costs imposed directly by the mate. If a couple breaks up, she immediately loses access to the resources provided by that man. Big cost right there. But also, in its most extreme, a cost could be violence, right? She tries to leave the relationship and he kills her. She tries to leave the relationship and he beats her up. She tries to leave the relationship and he kills their child and her. At the most extreme, these are examples. They occur today occasionally. It's likely they would have occurred more in an ancestral environment. And finally, the cost to the children. If we assume that children have been made in this partnership and that the man is a great deal of the protection, he's a great deal of the resource providing ability and so on, then even if the woman is not happy in the relationship, even if she would like to switch mates, she may realize, this is going to be a big, big cost to the children. And people think about that today as well. Again, this has not changed. People stay married for 18 years, waiting for the child to grow up and leave the house so that they can get divorced. Stay married for the kids. And there's people that will even tell you proscriptively, you should stay married for the kids. So, should you? I mean, I'm not telling you that, but that's what people say. And this is a cost. Breakups incur costs for the children, and if a woman is going to break up, that's going to be in her mind if she has kids. Went over this briefly a moment ago. Let's look at it in a little bit more depth. These are the inputs, right? These are the things that incentivize the mate switch. And the first of these was the partner's mate value. So mate value in a relationship is dynamic. It's not something that's fixed. We think of people as a number often. We assign them a rating. If it's physical attractiveness, if it's for their value, their SMV, their DMV, terms often used in dating subcultures, things like that. We assign people a value. But the reality of it is that these values are not fixed. The value that you have going into a relationship may not be what you have 2 years later or 10 years later. Mate value is very dynamic. It's always changing. And women track mate value throughout a relationship. This is something that research shows in the research cited in this paper. Women use declines in mate value as incentive to leave. So if you enter a relationship, and let's just assign a number, your mate value is a 7, and it's dropping, your mate value is dropping, it's going down. Now it's a 5. You're not the same person you were when you entered the relationship, and that might be enough for a woman to say, now it's time to switch mates. Some research into this, and if you want to look at the research, guys, this is all broken down by sections in the paper, so you just have to go to the section and look at it. So people hide their flaws in early relationships. People don't signal quite as honestly about themselves as many things that come out later. So someone might seem like a 7 on paper, and then the more you look into it, you realize, maybe he's not quite a 7. He lied about his career. He lied about how much money he had. He wore fake inserts in his shoes that made him seem like he was 2 inches taller. Whatever the thing may be, people lie in early relationships, and so mate value can drop off a little bit when people discover those lies. Research shows that poor economic success is one of the biggest predictors of divorce. What happens? People enter relationships and they're okay economically, they have kids, they lose a job, something happens, and they start to struggle economically, and it puts in a huge amount of stress on the relationship, and people break up over that. One of the biggest causes or correlates of divorce. This is one of the declines in mate value, basically someone who was economically up here and now they're down here. And then women get divorced over it. And we see research that shows female emotional investment correlates in the investment that a man puts in raising his own status and achievement. And so what does that mean? Basically, the less a man tries, the less a woman tries. Or I should say it this way, the less a man tries in his own life to elevate his own status, if he's not getting promotions at work, if he's not staying in school and getting his degree, let's say he's dropping out, he's not doing anything productive, he's not advancing in his business or anything like that, those are things that can predict lower investment by women in the relationship. So women see how much the man is investing in their own life, how much the man is striving for greatness, so to speak, and they invest in that man accordingly. If the man seems like he's not going anywhere, if he seems like he's not putting in the work or doing anything, she may be less interested in that man. And I think probably a really big example of this, although it's not listed in the paper, is what happens to people's bodies after they've been in a marriage for a while with age, right? People get into a relationship young, they get married or something like that, and then they start to slack off. They don't go to the gym anymore. They don't work out. They get fat. And again, remember, this applies to men and women here. So someone who was once attractive is now no longer physically attractive to the partner. Their value was way up here because remember, physical attractiveness, it's really high. I would say it's probably number one. Some people don't want to hear that. Some people know that. They already believe that. So, and again, that's for another video, and it's been in videos that I've covered. But your physical attractiveness, it's really high. It's really important in a relationship. It starts to decline. You go bald. You get old. You get fat. Maybe you get injured physically. Anything like that that makes it drop off. Bad news, guys, because that's a decline in mate value, and that's one of the reasons that a woman might leave a relationship. Or, as I said, a man. Moving on. So we see that the partner assesses the opposite partner. The woman assesses the man. At the same time, the woman is constantly assessing her own mate value. Right? So has the woman risen in status? Has she risen in resources? Has she improved her physical appearance, which is probably very important as well? Has she had kind of a glow up? Right? These are things that might make her realize, we don't have mate parity at this point. I should find a mate who is more on my level. And research shows this, especially as far as physical attractiveness as well. Again, cited in the paper, you can go and look at it. But women who are physically attractive, they tend to have higher standards than a man, right? Women select men who are more attractive based on their own attractiveness. If a woman enters a relationship and she doesn't look very good, but she loses a lot of weight, she starts to go to the gym, she improves her appearance, and they were both down here previously, and now she is up here, could be bad news for that relationship. Might be a reason that she starts looking for another partner that is more on her level. And as I mentioned, alternative mates. Let's say alternative mates come into the picture for whatever reason. It's a friend who had a girlfriend and now they break up, so now he's single. It's a new group of males in the ancestral environment, a new tribe converging with your tribe. It's, let's say, in a very modern example, let's say someone gets on online dating and now they have access to a whole lot of new partners, right? This new access can make people reevaluate their mate selection because now they have a new pool of people to choose from and you are being compared to the people in that pool. And to go into this in more depth, there's 3 components here, and these are interest, value, and eligibility. Interest has to do with how interested the man is in actually forming a relationship. Is he interested in me at all? And there's components to this, like will he have sex with me, but it's actually important for women who are mate switching, and we'll get into this later in the video, that the interest is genuine for a relationship. Because typically, what we see in the mate switching hypothesis, and what we tend to see in all of the research, again, we will get into this a little bit later, is that women switch mates because they want a relationship with the new mate. It's usually not sufficient that it's just sex. That's usually not going to do it for a woman. So interest, is he actually committed to a new relationship, right? Value, of course, is going to be the second big one, because if a bunch of new guys come into the pool, but none of them are as good as your current mate, you're probably not going to switch mates, right? And eligibility. If a bunch of people come into the new pool, but you can't date them because they all have mates, or let's say you don't want to pick one because he has baggage, right? It's a man. Let's say it's a man who has kids, because that also matters to women. Not as much, I don't think, but it does matter. And so these things might make someone less eligible even if they are a potential mate. So those three things to consider, right? Interest. Is it someone that's going to be a viable mate to switch to? Are they higher value than the current mate? And is it really eligible? Is it really feasible? Are they eligible as a mate? Some research that supports that very specific part of the hypothesis. So when people are in committed relationships and when they report high amounts of commitment, they devalue other mates. And what does that mean? When you're in a relationship with someone, if you really love your partner and you commit to that partner, you're pulled for an experiment and they say, hey, rate the attractiveness of these men. People who report higher commitment in their relationships rate other men as lower. They rate other men as being less desirable to be in a relationship with. People are less interested in relationships with other people when they're very committed. If they're not very committed, they rate other men as more attractive physically. They rate other men as more attractive or desirable as relationship partners as well. So, kind of intuitive there, that part. Second part, what the research shows, is that people report lower relationship satisfaction when they feel that they are more valuable than their partner, right? If you ask people to rate the mate value of themselves and their partner, and there is a big discrepancy, couples that rate themselves much higher than their partners, they feel lower satisfaction in those relationships. And in addition to that, they also report investing less in those relationships. They report putting lower effort into those relationships. Now we're going to look at the outputs of the hypothesis, right? And what are we talking about here with outputs? We're talking about mate switching behaviors. What are people doing to switch mates? Buss and colleagues, they developed a hypothesis within a hypothesis, so to speak. Basically the backup mate hypothesis. And what is this? It says that even people who have good relationships should benefit from cultivating backup mates. And why is that? Because you could be in a great relationship and something could happen to your partner, right? He could die. He could suddenly decline in status. Whatever the case, he might not be there, or he might be a much less desirable mate. So it is actually beneficial, both for men and for women. When I say beneficial, I mean in an evolutionary sense. It's beneficial insofar as this predicts an increase in reproductive fitness. It's beneficial insofar as it would have facilitated having more offspring in an ancestral environment. I'm not saying it's beneficial like it's going to help your relationship. I think if you're deliberately cultivating backup mates, I think you might actually be asking for problems. But it would have been beneficial in this sense. And this is kind of what we see people do. In dating circles, right? In the red pill, in the manosphere, and so on. There's a term for this, right? What is it? Orbiters. People cultivate orbiters. Orbiters are people who are ostensibly friends, who are just friends of the opposite sex, who you keep around thinking, I don't like them as much as my current partner, or the cost risk is not enough to leave my current partner for them, but if I were single, this is someone that I would date and I would pursue. That's basically what an orbiter is. And let me do a quick digression here. I want you guys to think about something. If you're coming from manosphere, people say orbiters, and they say another term, beta orbiters, right? The idea is that the woman has no interest in these orbiters. That she likes her boyfriend a lot, or maybe she doesn't even like him that much or whatever. But these orbiters are not even on the picture. They're just kept around for validation. That's probably not the case, guys. These are potential backup mates. These are people who have already been kind of assigned a value in a way. They've already been screened, and it's already been decided, this is a potential relationship. This is someone that if I left my current boyfriend or my girlfriend, I could immediately go into a relationship with them. So they're not people just kept around for validation, but they're kept around as potential partners who have already passed the test, so to speak. So what does research show? It shows that men and women on average report having about 3 backup mates. And what does that mean? It means opposite sex friends that they would potentially date specifically. No one is saying like, yes, I've cultivated 3 backup mates, because people don't admit that. They don't tell themselves that either. Like, yeah, my 3 friends are people that I would date. But on average, people report having about 3 opposite sex friends that they would potentially enter into a romantic relationship with. Women specifically, but not men, and this is one of the gender differences here. Women specifically, but not men, report that they would be mad if one of their backup mates entered into a romantic relationship. And women also report, but not men, that if their backup mates were to try to get married, they might even intervene to stop it. So this should tell you something about these opposite sex friendships. People really don't like if you say, I don't think a man and a woman can be friends, but the research does not paint a good picture about what is going on in these situations. And additionally, women, but not men, okay? Women pick male friends who have the traits that they value in a romantic relationship. So women pick men for friends who are physically stronger, who are physically more attractive. They pick male friends who have a higher level of resource ability, typically a higher income or higher education. Basically, the traits that women like in their male friends are the same traits that women like in their relationships. And so that would be consistent with this backup mates hypothesis, right? The backup mate hypothesis with the orbiters, particularly for women, that these are not just friends, but that these are potential romantic interests. These are people that, if the current relationship was not going okay, they would be on the table perhaps for something to happen. And I don't want to get anyone riled up here. That doesn't mean that she's going to leave you for these other people, because if that were the case, maybe it would have already happened, right? Basically, if you're the one in the relationship and they're the backups, your value, at the moment at least, it's got to be a little bit higher. The cost-benefit trade-off has not been enough for her to actually leave you for them, but just know, if your mate value declined a lot, according to this hypothesis, according to what we're looking at here, could be an outcome. So another common behavior, affairs, right? Cheating. And why do women have affairs if it's not for good genes? So I've mentioned that the good genes hypothesis has not been doing well lately. Research designed to support that hypothesis hasn't been able to replicate well. We typically don't see much support for it at this point. So if women are having affairs and it's not to get the good genes of another man, why would that be? What could be the benefit of that from an evolutionary perspective? And one benefit of that would be as mate insurance, right? Basically, it's backup mates. It's having male friends. If something happens to your current partner, as good as he is, and as much as you want to live with him the rest of your life, at least you have someone else that's going to be there to take care of you. Having an affair partner on the side, having someone that is already engaged in a relationship, may serve as an easy way to enter a new relationship quickly if it fails. Affairs may also represent a better way to assess an alternate partner or a relationship. And we'll get into this a little bit later in the video, but most women don't report having affairs only for sex. Their affair partners are people that they tend to love, or at least report being in love with. Those are people that they want to have a relationship with. So affairs represent basically a relationship trial run. This is a way that women can assess, is the affair partner actually a better relationship than my current partner? And what's not mentioned directly in the paper, but I think is actually very consistent with this, an idea that I've had, is that it's likely these affairs represent a seamless transition from one relationship to another. Most of the time when women switch mates from one partner directly to another, it's in the context of an affair, the vast majority of the time. Instead of being single for a long time, which would have incurred high risks in an ancestral environment, right? Because a single woman, imagine she has a child, she's all alone, she can be taken advantage of very easily. Perhaps she can't recover her own resources very easily. If you can go immediately from one mate to another without having any downtime in between, that can mitigate a lot of those risks. Even in the case of a modern environment, imagine, for example, that you're dating a man and you live with him, and he takes care of you, and you don't work, and he pays for everything, and you live in the house. And if he breaks up with you, you're out on the street, literally. Very bad. And that might influence why you stay with that person. But if you have another partner to go to, immediately Well, maybe you can avoid homelessness. So making that seamless transition from one partner to another is pretty important, and having an affair could be the bridge that is needed for that to be possible. And as far as mate switching, what we're talking about is the breakup process as well, right? Emotional disengagement, breaking up. The important thing here is to minimize costs, because there's a lot of costs to breaking up. So what I use is called mate ejection tactics that are designed to minimize costs. An example of that they use in the paper is putting the onus of the relationship dissolution onto the self, right? Saying, oh, it's not you, it's me, I just need to find myself. Little excuses. Mitigating a loss to social reputation is very important. One thing that men and women do to do this is they try to ensure that they're the ones who initiated the breakup, because people look better when they're the ones that initiate the breakup. So you'll see men and women both over-report being the initiator of the breakup. If you take a sample of men and women and you ask them, or a sample of dyads, I should say, that have broken up, and you ask them, who broke up with who? You'll get a rate that is over 100%. So someone is lying, basically. People also disseminate negative information when they break up, true or untrue. And what does that do? Well, that helps to keep friends and family member on your side. If the other person was at fault, and everyone knows they're at fault, who are they going to side with? They're probably going to side with you. The friends are going to side with you. In many cases, even the step family, right? The family of your ex will side with you. They'll side with the partner that was essentially the victim. It's not uncommon. I mean, I say it's not uncommon. I should say it happens. I don't have an actual number for you. That people will continue relationships with the in-laws, basically, with the families of their exes after a divorce, even if they don't get along with the ex. And this is very important from an evolutionary point of view, because remember, women in an ancestral environment wouldn't have had access to the kind of legal and resource provisions that exist today from the state, right? No social security, no homeless shelters, no alimony, no division of resources following a divorce. All of these things that make breakups easier for women now would not have existed in the past. If you broke up, what you had was what you had, and you were all on your own at that point. And final part, remating, right? The affair partner becomes the new mate. And as I described, this is typically how most actual mate switches occur. If a woman leaves someone for someone else, it's almost always the case that they were having an affair prior to that fact. The alternative is that a couple break up and now she is alone and single in the mate market. There's more risks here, again described. There's the baggage, perhaps she has kids, barriers to new relationships, things that would make it difficult to date again. And so Buss hypothesized that perhaps women would prefer to brachiate to new partners to minimize costs. That's kind of similar to what I described previously. There are benefits if you can go directly from one partner to another that you don't have if you break up and then you're single for a while and you have to find a new partner. In the manosphere, dating communities and stuff, they have a term for this as well, right? Monkey branching. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. Now, let's go over the mate switching hypothesis versus the good genes hypothesis. Because the mate switching hypothesis was developed basically to provide an alternative, a better alternative to the good genes hypothesis that is a little bit older, that was ending up with a lot of problems. Let's go over the good genes hypothesis first to give you kind of a background of what exactly we are looking at here. This is also called the dual mate hypothesis. It's also called the ovulatory shift hypothesis. And the idea is that women's preferences in mates shift when they're ovulating. Women prefer a mate as a provider who has different traits than the mate they prefer to actually have a child with. And so they pursue that secondary mate when they are ovulating. This is similar to that, again, in the manosphere terminology. Alpha fucks, beta bucks. So women maintain one partner basically while they're cucking him with this good genes mate, okay? I can't go into a lot of detail here or it'll be way too long, but I have another video on this. I've done an article on the website covering this in much, much more depth. I would recommend looking at that as well. But basically, these things about the good genes hypothesis, ovulatory shift, dual mate hypothesis, haven't been able to replicate well. They can't explain a lot of mate switching behavior that we see either. So that's why this mate switching hypothesis became necessary, because the good genes hypothesis basically it kind of wasn't cutting it. Why would women switch mates if they're not seeking out those good genes, so to speak. This is the mate switching hypothesis as an alternative. We've gone over some of this. So mate insurance, right? They're having affairs, they're cultivating these backup mates in case something happens to the current mate. This helps them ensure that they have the best partner for a switch, that the person they have ready there, that they've already been having sex with, that they already have a cultivated relationship with, is actually going to be a better provider, a better caretaker, is going to be more nurturing and so on. All of these things that would have been valuable in an ancestral environment, more protective and so on, is actually more valuable essentially than the current mate. The mate switching hypothesis also describes behaviors that the good genes hypothesis could not, in breakups and re-entering the market as a single individual. For example, how to make the transition to dating more smooth, basically. How to re-enter the dating market without incurring so many costs. And here we can look at some of the research findings listed in this paper that supported mate switching, but not dual mating. One part of this is research on relationship satisfaction. Relationship satisfaction is one of the strongest predictors for women, but not for men, of infidelity. And relationships dissatisfaction or satisfaction also predicts female interest in men regardless of the ovulatory cycle. So what does this mean exactly? Well, for one, if this were a good genes thing, we shouldn't expect relationship satisfaction to predict infidelity or cheating. Why? Because the woman is not selecting a good genes man for a relationship. She is selecting him for a very short temporary pairing, but she is selecting her current partner for the relationship. So we see an opposite finding here, one that doesn't predict what the good genes hypothesis would indicate. And since we don't see a relationship between infidelity, ovulatory cycle, and relationship dissatisfaction, that kind of confirms it further, that what is going on here isn't a fertility or reproduction seeking behavior, but rather a relationship seeking behavior. Research into reasons for infidelity, conducted by asking women why, further confirms the mate switching hypothesis, but not the good genes hypothesis. Why? What women primarily indicate is that they picked an affair partner because they wanted them to be a new partner. They wanted to find a new relationship partner. They said the new partner is a more desirable partner. They also say that they picked the new partner to make a transition easier, right? Because they wanted to enter into a new relationship. Rarely do they say, he was hot, the sex was good, or anything that would indicate a reproductive, solely, or I should say a solely reproductive urge. Everything they indicate, on the other hand, indicates a desire to enter a new relationship with the affair partner. And further, what we see is that the desire for affair partners is not solely physical. The qualities that women report they want in their affair partner, or in a short-term mate and a long-term mate, also pretty much the same. Women report a great deal of non-physical traits in their affair partners that made them desirable. And these are traits and behaviors that would make them desirable as long-term partners. So we're kind of seeing a convergence of evidence from different directions indicating that women are having affairs because they want a new relationship with this guy. And we can see that insofar as women's feelings for their affairs as well, for their affair partners versus men. 79% of women report that they were in love with their affair partner versus only 30% of men, which is very consistent with what we should expect evolutionarily. Why? Because women don't get a lot of benefit from having an affair partner if they already have a relationship from an evolutionary point of view. Men do, right? We went over this at the very beginning, because men can have babies simultaneously with many, many, many women. And if they don't take care of one of those children, but they take care of the child in their relationship, it is the same outcome for them either way. A woman, on the other hand, if she has an affair, she risks her current relationship and all of the provisions, and she doesn't know if the affair is going to be any good. If it's only for sex, if it's only for short term, it's a lot of risk without any of the rewards given by the current relationship. So women are betting on their affair partners being a relationship. They're saying, I love this person, I want to be with him. Men, They know this is just sex. And we're kind of nearing the end here, guys, so I want to share this quote with you. This kind of sums up what we just went over, a quotation from David Buss. He said, "The key point is that mate switching may be the most frequent function of female infidelity." What does that mean? It means that when women cheat, they're trying to switch partners. They're trying to switch to a new relationship. When men cheat, as we can see from the previous statistic, it's often just sex. For women, no, they want a relationship. Let's revisit some of these male and female differences that we went over. As I mentioned at the very beginning, a lot of this applies to men and women equally, the kind of strategies used and so on. When it has been different, I've tried to explain in the video where men and women are different, and just kind of a recap of some of those sex differences here. Men fall in love less, right? Men have affairs even when the relationship is good. So infidelity for men is not necessarily a mate switching strategy, as it seems to be for women. Infidelity seems to be the way that women look for a new partner. For men, infidelity is the goal in and of itself. They want to have sex. And we see this in polygynous societies around the world as well. When men have the ability to, they don't switch to a better mate. They just add a new mate on. That doesn't seem to be the case with women either. Like the old poem kind of says, "Hogamus, higamus, men are polygamous, higamus, hogamus, women monogamous." And just some final thoughts to leave you guys with. You may have heard that poem before. Something to keep in mind with evolutionary psychology, with things like that. If I say women are monogamous, men are polygamous, this is descriptive. It's not prescriptive. I'm not telling you that, oh, it is male nature to cheat, to be unfaithful. Therefore, you should cheat. And if you cheat, it's okay for you to do so. That's not the case. This is describing tendencies in behavior. It's not describing what is right or wrong or how you should behave. And insofar as you are a person, assuming that you are actually a person who is interested in having a normal relationship and not having your girlfriend break up with you, I would recommend not cultivating a lot of affair partners. Similarly, this doesn't consist of a template of how you should behave to find a good mate. I'm kind of reminded of FDS, or female dating strategy. I think some of you may have heard of that, some may have not. This is basically a kind of a red pill community, but for women, kind of telling women what they need to do to find a man. And these communities are kind of interested in evo-psych as well, but they kind of put their own spin on it, as some of these dating PUA kind of communities do as well. And basically it's a template how to find a high value man as they see it, and how to extract resources from them. So what we see, again, as I described throughout this video, is women select partners based on their value, which includes their ability to provide, their resources, and so on. But this isn't telling anyone you need to be consciously assessing value and assigning a number. And if your man drops too low, oh, you should break up with him and find yourself a higher value man. Again, that's not what this is saying. It's not prescriptive. It's not telling you to behave in a way that, if you were to emulate it, would basically be kind of like antisocial behavior. But some people take it that way. Some people use it as a justification for that, which it essentially isn't. Okay, so another point here, and that's that women tend to want the same kind of mate across the board. You guys have heard in the manosphere, right? Alpha fucks, beta bucks. That's probably going to have to move past that. It doesn't seem to really be the case. Women are looking for, even in their short-term relationship partners, even in their affairs, they're looking for someone who meets the same qualities as a long-term mate. And this might not even mean that a woman is actually thinking this person is going to be my next long-term mate. Because remember, we've gone over how backup mates are cultivated and maintained. But as far as the traits that women find attractive, they're typically going to be the same. And a final point here that I think can be applied to relationships perhaps is that you should be conscious of the fact that your value changes over a relationship, and that your partner is evaluating that value as it goes up and down. It doesn't sound very romantic, right? The idea that you are always being judged and evaluated by your partner, especially perhaps even less romantic if you remember that you are being judged and evaluated compared to potential partners that could be chosen over you. But this is likely the reality of it. If you enter into a relationship as one person and you become someone fundamentally different, someone who is worse, you're probably going to be less attractive to your partner. And if that person becomes that much worse, if they drop a lot, then your partner might leave. And this applies to men and to women. What I have said in the past is that a relationship takes a lot of work. You have to continue working on yourself and maintaining yourself as an attractive person, which means behaviorally, which means, I guess, accomplishing whatever goals made that person attracted to you in the first place. It probably means maintaining your body, right? An enormous amount of people, especially in the West, they get into relationships and they think, I've made it, and they let go. They get fat. They stop having sex regularly. They stop going on dates. They stop showing affection to their partner. All of these different signals that would have made you a more valuable mate begin to decline. Then the relationship ends and they wonder what happened. And usually in retrospect, people kind of have an idea. They can look back and think, oh, I see. Yeah, it just got worse and worse. But it's a gradual process. And so relationships take a lot of work to maintain. And I know there's men out there watching this who see that and think, that doesn't sound appealing to me, right? This is an issue that falls into that question. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is a relationship really worth it if you have to put in constant effort, if you're constantly being evaluated by your partner? It's certainly not the Disney idea of a relationship where you've found true love and it's almost guaranteed to last the rest of your life. It's a much more shark-like conception of it, which is kind of what you should expect from evolution, that it's not idealistic, that it's something that is dynamic and that changes from moment to moment. So that's something to consider if you are someone that is interested in relationships, or if you are someone that has no interest in relationships, because that's a fact about relationships. I think that might play a lot into if you decide if a relationship is even worth it or not, and if you decide that it is, that can kind of guide you into at least the mindset that you need to have to make sure that your relationship works, that it continues to be happy, and that it functions over the long term. Anyway, thank you for staying for the whole video, guys. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll try to make another video for you guys very soon.